Chapter 5. Read. 1. Neither Troy or his mother had called our house since before Halloween. I was afraid that my wish was being granted, concerned that I'd be alone through the next part of my life, the military life, that I'd end up hated by my entire platoon, company, and battalion, that there wouldn't be the fallback friend, like Troy, to engage in the occasional night out or everyday conversation. I'd talked to Dad about this worry just before Thanksgiving. Since then, he'd been keeping me busy with chores around the house, cleaning gutters, putting up and taking down giant Thanksgiving cornucopia made of plywood and paint, pilgrims, corn stalks, pumpkins, and a gourd-looking thing for the front yard. They all had sat there, perched up strangely from the white snow, the snow that would be there until late April, maybe early May. My hands hurt from the bitter cold. At least the wind wasn't as harsh as it was the day before. Plus, the sky was bright and sunny. The gloves didn't seem to do any good, so I took them off, hoping the sunshine might help give me some relief. Taking down Christmas lights wasn't as fun as putting them up, but at least it was a little faster coming down. I could hear Mom and Dad bantering back and forth the way they always did. Mom wasn't as good at it as Dad, though. He tended to go too far, according to her, and Dad laughing at her, getting her upset sometimes, didn't help any. Suddenly, a scream filled with holy terror. It was Mom. I dropped the ball of lights, took a few steps downward, then jumped from the fourth rung, hitting the snowy and frozen ground. The vibration moved through me like a shock. I ran to the rear of the house to see Mom crashing through the hard white shell of knee-deep snow. She was in her nightgown still. "Oh, God! Oh, God! Oh, God! No, 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 no! Jimmy! Jimmy!" Then I saw Dad. The position of his body was like what you'd imagine if that person were burying their head in the sand, like he was looking for something he'd lost, if that were possible. Only, of course, he wasn't looking for anything. He'd fallen from the stepladder headlong into the ground. Dad moaned. "Dad!" I got to him just after Mom did. I reached under the snow to help Mom pull him out. "Don't move him," Mom yelled, grabbing my hand beneath the snow. "I mean, maybe—" She was scared. "He'll freeze to death, Mom." "Oh, God." Mom stood, moved to his other side, and knelt into the drift on the other side of Dad. "Just be careful. Please be okay, honey. Oh, God, please. Jimmy, are you okay?" She knew this was a question that didn't need to be answered. She saw him fall. "He hit hard on the side of the ladder, then hit the ground face first," she said. I gasped as we pulled him upward. "Mom, call an ambulance." Blood was dripping slowly from Dad's temple. It was a large gash for as little blood as was dripping. "Ah!" Dad yelped. "My arm!" I'd failed to see that Dad's arm was broken at first. Halfway between his wrist and elbow was what looked like an extra joint, bent at a 90-degree angle. Dad's coat was bunched up at that point. "Oh, God!" Dad was rocking back and forth. He looked a little woozy, but didn't pass out. "Hurry, Cheryl!" 2. Square crackers stuffed with cheese mocked me. I stood staring at them, but they wouldn't fall. They just hung there, daring me to lose my mind, which, by the way, was racing to find whether this was all real or not. "It was my fault, Dad. I'm sorry. I should have taken the short ladder. Why did I take the tall ladder for the short side of the house? Stupid." I repeated versions of this guilty phrase over and over again to myself. That morning, Dad had emphasized over and over again that I needed to be careful on the tall ladder in front of the house because he wouldn't be there to hold it. "We don't need to be going to the hospital today. especially during the game." He chuckled. I smiled back. Generally speaking, and by default, Dad was in a jolly mood. It would usually take something serious to give him an angry response, which, although rare, he could express very well. His face would turn bright red with just about any elevated emotion. If he were angry, you'd get to witness the vein that popped up on his forehead. It started between his eyes and, like a bolt of lightning, meandered all the way back into his receding hairline. Our favorite cycle of laughter, though, came when Dad would be drinking, then laughing, which caused us to laugh, which caused him to laugh, and so on. My heart raced as I stood motionless, recalling Dad's happiness. The cut on his face came from the frozen ground under the snow. The break, according to Mom, was because when Dad toppled to the side, he was standing on the very top of the stepladder, holding onto the gutter with one hand and tugging down the lights with the other. He landed on top of his arm, and his arm was on the top and side of the ladder as it hit the ground. "Honey, I was afraid. I was afraid your dad was dead. I saw him hit. It was so hard. It was just a terrible thud, and then no sound. He didn't move. Oh my God, Finn, I was so afraid. Why couldn't he wait to take them down? I told him it was too cold. I told him. You heard me tell him. He's so damn..." Unexpectedly, through a layer of tears, my vision became blurred. "Are you okay?" A small hand embraced my shoulder from behind me. "Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm okay," I said with a start. I stepped slightly to the side, enough that her hand dropped from me. I pushed the sadness from my eyes. "You can go ahead. My crackers, I was tumbling through my vocabulary. I couldn't find the words to describe my situation, so I just stopped. My hands were trembling, but when I looked down at them, like a valve shutting down a rush of water, they were in a state of calm. I just stood looking at this woman, and I breathed in and I breathed out, content in its strangeness. She turned her attention to the dangling crackers. "Huh. Well, looks like you got ripped off, doesn't it?" She spoke with a light heart. She looked tired and unkempt. Her hair was silver, but she looked younger than my mom in her face. And like a nervous gambler, she was dropping a stack of coins from her fingers onto her opposite palm, over and over again. I turned back to the vending machine. Prompted by the sound of her coins, I rattled the 55 cents in my pocket left over from the $1 I had used to purchase the uncompromising crackers. It's okay, I really wasn't hungry. Which was true. I wasn't. My stomach had been in knots ever since the fall. What I was really doing there at that machine was looking for something to do, not something to eat. I was willing to do anything to get away from the stressful echoes of the tile floors, whispers, beeping sounds, and Mom telling our story over and over again to anyone nearby. "Tell you what." The small woman pushed by me and began shoving quarters into the machine. She chose E9, the same crackers on which I'd settled. 2 packs tumbled from the auger and thumped onto the bottom of the machine. She worked her hand in, then out. "Here you go, honey. It happens to all of us sometimes." I could tell she wanted me to smile, so I did. A little. "Thanks," I said, with only an icing of sincerity. Bing! "Dr. Strong, you are needed in room 402. Dr. Strong, you are needed in room 402. "That's not a doctor they're calling, you know," she said, trying to penetrate my haze of disconnect. "Sorry?" I asked. "That Dr. Strong, did you hear that just now?" I just stood with my eyebrows perched. "Anyway, that's not a doctor. They're calling for an orderly. Another nurse. Anybody available? Somebody must be throwing a fit or something, and they need help to restrain the patient. So what they do is call Dr. Strong.
Get it?
I stood waiting, assuming the question was rhetorical.
I was a nurse for 16 years before we moved here. I really loved being a nurse, too. And, I had my share of excitement, and heartache. I don't guess I missed the messes, though. The long hours and drama.
She laughed, obviously remembering something specific, shaking her head side to side. The drama between the nurses, the doctors, especially young doctors, and families. I wanted to walk away, but my feet wouldn't cooperate, like they were stuck to the high-gloss floor. The battle was between my mind and body. I was to go nowhere. My mind had lost. I fumbled with the wrapper, looking for the logical and easy way to proceed with this unavoidable dialogue, thinking that if I couldn't escape, at least I might join the conversation. She motioned down the hall, talking with a mouthful.
My husband is just over there. We've been here 6 days. The food in the cafeteria isn't that bad. Have you been there?
I shook my head.
No?
She continued.
Just get on the elevator and press LL. Not L, but LL. That'll bring you to the lower level. That's what LL means,
I looked down the hall as her kind but never-ending voice rebounded off the decorated walls. At least a dozen pieces of children's artwork lined the wall up to the first doorway. I wondered which of the 5 rooms she spoke of that her husband was in, but I didn't ask where specifically. I was content not knowing, I suppose. I wasn't going to go see him or anything, so what difference did it make? Instead, strangely, I asked a more personal and intimate question, which of course is unlike the usual me. Is he okay? Your husband, I mean. Will he be okay? She stepped toward me and placed her hand on my chest, looking up at my face, into my eyes. Then she patted my chest like you'd pat the bottom of a baby if you were trying to ease it to sleep. She wasn't hiding her broken life, her loneliness. She looked down. After the time of 3 or 4 breaths, I wondered, was she crying? I couldn't tell. Then her voice, different than before. We're not sure if he'll be okay. Well, I'm not sure. The neurosurgeon, before this morning's surgery seemed optimistic, but I've seen what head trauma can do to a person. I mean, if the person makes it out alive, she said, with anger mixed into her brokenness. We have 3 kids. They're all grown. They all live close. None of them are here. They're busy, I guess. Anyway, the neurosurgeon should be back up here soon. I hope soon, to talk with me. She stood close to me, so close I was looking down at the top of her unwashed hair. Finnegan? My mom called, interrupting this, bizarre encounter. Hello, she said with a nod to this stranger. I stepped back, away from the silver-haired woman, looking back at her. I'm sorry, I have to. I motioned a sweep of my head toward Mom. We have to. I pointed with my thumb over my shoulder and excused myself, stepping toward my mom. And Mom, while keeping her suspicious eyes on the woman, spoke to me. The nurse said they'll be wheeling Dad up soon. 20 or 30 minutes, she said. They have to clean him up and that kind of thing. I fumbled around with the wrapper, finally breaking it open, pulling out a cracker, and asked Mom, Want one? No, thank you, sweetie. Let's go to the room, though, so we're there when he returns and so we don't miss the doctor. She leaned closer as we walked and breathed, Who was that? I didn't answer. Instead, feeling compelled, I calmly broke from Mom's grasp of my arm. I went back to the woman quickly as she was already walking the opposite direction. Ma'am? She turned. I stopped at an arm's length away, then said, I'm sorry. Her tears were mostly gone, and then, with a tilt of her head, she spoke with an air of wisdom. Our God is sovereign, she said with confidence. This was to be, even as time began. She paused.
But it doesn't make things easier, knowing that the terrible things that he brings us through, that all of this is part of his plan, you know?
I stared at her. Her words rung hard within the empty halls of my mind. She said something that I was unprepared to receive. If it were the day before, I would have excused myself. I would have forgotten the meaningless drivel of this religious woman. Instead, suddenly I was no longer indifferent regarding statements like this. My father's life was spared, and by something unknown. At least, unknown to me. I was overwhelmed when considering all of the details of the day. The ladder. Mom was there. The fall. The angle of the fall. His arm taking the majority of the blow. Was he supposed to fall regardless? My thoughts went deeper, making me more confused still. Then this woman and her kindness, her absolute position regarding God. I asked myself, is God real? I answered myself, no, I don't think so. The God I don't believe in controls all things, even this, I said with an increasing voice within my silence. The one who many say created me can also destroy me? And it's his choice whether someone is given a long, healthy life? It's his choice whether someone falls off a ladder or whether they don't? It's his choice whether someone falls off a ladder and dies or lives? An eruption was building within me. I could hear Mom's footsteps and her familiar breathing behind me, but I didn't turn to her. Instead, words burst from my mouth. You think God made this happen? Muscles tightened throughout my body. I clenched my jaw as I tried to stay the surge of emotion. I felt my fingernails digging into my palms. Her shoulders dropped and moved forward, a posture of sympathy and humility. She was disarming me. My muscles let go of their flex. She hooked her oily hair over her ears. Look, she said, as her bloodshot eyes moved from one of my eyes to the other, back and forth as if they were trying to search deeper within me, to find something, hoping for something. I studied her eyes as she studied mine. I could tell that in the healthy part of her life, outside a hospital with a loved one, that her eyes were beautiful. I imagined that they would sparkle. They were pools of blue with brown around the pupils and random brown spots into the most azure outer iris. I don't know all things, she conceded, but I do know that God's will cannot be thwarted by the will of man. Neither you or I or anyone else can change what he has destined. I'm sorry, miss, but my boy needs to come back to his dad's room. Mom's lips were pursed, and she didn't look thrilled that she had to break apart this encounter. Finnegan. She tugged at my arm, and she led me away. As we rounded the corner of the hall, I saw a familiar face. 3. Hey there, Wilson. Just as I was saying it, I realized I was saying it to 3 Wilsons. They all responded with a smile. Mom was first to meet them as they walked toward us. Cambry, thank you. These are beautiful. Mom shoved her nose into the flowers to breathe them in. I'm glad they're in a vase. Thank you very much. We'd just looked at those exact flowers in the gift shop about a half hour ago. They're from us all, Mrs. Wilson responded uncomfortably, making a quick glance at her husband, then her son. Oh, that weather out there. Troy gave me a handshake and a half hug. Mr. Wilson stood, patiently, until he could hug me and then Mom. Greetings with the Wilsons all at once were always choppy and worth avoiding, even as far back as I can remember. Dad has his few close friends. Together they would watch the Edmonton Oilers and the Green Bay Packers. But Ned never really fit in with them. Even though his son was a jock, he didn't understand sports in the least. When Mr. Wilson tried to talk with Dad about the Oilers, I'd become embarrassed for him. I'd try to escape the area of conversation. His comments were always in general terms, but he still missed the mark most of the time, even with such a broad-shot effort. Mispronouncing names, never understanding who the Oilers were. One night on a sleepover, he did actually talk to me, a little too much. I was only 10, but he thought it was a good idea to talk to me about his struggling marriage with Troy's mom. I sat there while Troy was busy pretending to be a magician, doing card tricks. I sat there in a daze, begging internally for his grown-up confession to stop. I think we just fall out of love sometimes, Finnegan. You know what I mean? Now that I think of it, I never did tell Mom or Dad about that. Dad had always groaned when Mom would insist each year that he invite them all over for the Christmas party. During the Christmas parties of my junior and senior years, even though it wasn't spoken of, I think Dad was happier than he'd ever been. It was during that time that Mom stopped insisting on inviting them. I suppose it was because they no longer lived in Salt Creek. Out of sight, out of mind. But those earlier years, Dad would stress his point in vain. But that's the point, Cheryl. Don't you want to enjoy yourself? Cambry will say something that annoys you, and Ned will talk about the post office. Dad was a mailman. And I'll be annoyed. Before you know it, our little Finnegan will be annoyed, because Troy did something annoying. So I just get annoyed? I'm easily annoyed? I'm hard to please? We'll all be annoyed, honey. That's not what I mean. You know Cambry, she'll say something inappropriate, then there will be some sort of fight between her and Ned. You know how insecure Ned is. It kills the Christmas mood. It kills the fun. Besides, Ned just stands there looking like a Weasley little weirdo. But Mom would always wait Dad out, knowing Dad's annual Christmas party guest list objections were based on slight exaggerations of real examples of the past. Eventually, Dad would make the phone call. This was such a confusing thing to Dad and I. We both knew the resentment Mom had for Mrs. Wilson. In the end, our suppression of what we knew was truth would lift. That it was Troy, not Ned or Cambry, that was wanted at the party. That was welcome into our home, and that was because he was my friend, the only one I had. Mrs. Wilson was wearing a red puffy coat, like the kind someone might wear while skiing. Way too expensive a coat to be wearing around Roberts Regional. She unzipped it and shook it down her arms, causing body parts to shake. Mom's eyes went straight to the fourth button on Cambry's lacy green blouse. My eyes went there, too. Her neckline was deep and glowed an unnatural hue of orange. My eyes went from wide and dilated to a hard squint, as my thought went from oofta to what the hell? I don't think I had ever been offended at the female form before that moment. The apparent disregard she had for the situation, the location, was mind-boggling. However, it was typical of her actions. It was evident that she had gotten ready for this specific visit. It wouldn't have taken Dick Tracy to discover that she had taken time, digging through her closet with many clothes to choose from, and decided on a summer look, one that would show off her boobs, and a thick winter coat to unveil the prize for all to see. I looked back at Mom. She was still zeroed in on the pair. I saw Mrs. Wilson place her hand over her chest as she began to speak pleasantries with my mom. "Oh, that weather out there," she repeated with her heavy South Dakota accent. "Oh, I said that already, didn't I?" "Yeah, you betcha," Mom said, with the thick sarcasm of molasses. "So how's your dad, Finn?" asked Troy, with his hand firmly on my shoulder, not at all interested in the tension between his mom and mine. We're not sure yet. We were worried about his neck, you know. His fall looked like it could have broken his neck, I mean. But his arm. Oh, man, Troy, it was disgusting. If he hadn't had his coat on, Mom would have passed out.
I had to cut his sleeve off. I tried to use it to tie around his arm to stop the bleeding. The bone was busted through the skin, really bad. Anyways, the sleeve wouldn't tie around his arm because it was too bulky, so I ran inside. Mom was screaming on the phone to the ambulance people. I grabbed a towel, cut it long ways to use as a tourniquet. Oh, and his head was bleeding, too. It's a worse cut than the cut you got when we were at the lake, but it wasn't bleeding as bad. Mom said because it was so cold, but I don't know why, really. Jeez. Well, he's going to be okay then? I mean, besides a broken arm and, probably stitches? Yeah, he'll be okay, it looks like. But the arm's worse off than just a broken arm. The bone was splintered bad, like when you break a fishing pole. And the doctor said there might be other damage besides the bone and skin. But they'll have to tell us what they fixed after the surgery. That's the surgery he's in now. I glanced around to see that I wasn't just speaking to Troy. Everyone was locked in on my play-by-play. Oh, and they did x-rays and used some other machine to look at his brain and his eye. That's where the cut is, on his eye. That was bad too, but the arm was the grossest thing I ever saw in my life. I shuddered. 2 different doctors. One for the arm, one for the eye. Mom? Neurologist, she filled in. He's supposed to talk with us pretty soon, I think. I leaned into Troy. I whispered, "The weight is driving Mom mad." Then I continued in my normal volume. Still, though, he's staying here tonight. Mom will, too. She wants me to go home. We haven't been up on this floor very long. I was in the waiting room forever. That was torture. I didn't know what was going on. One guy sat down right beside me, right next to me. There were 20 seats in there he could have taken. Troy laughed. He coughed all over me. I was really scared for Dad. I paused for a second, as that thought moved me. Then I attempted to speak out my thought more clearly. Troy, for a little while, I was afraid. I didn't know. My friend responded with a face sympathetic to me. A nurse walked by. She noticed the new faces and asked the Wilsons, "Cold out there?" Her eyes traveled to the vast and orange expanse of cleavage. Ned responded, "Oh yeah, 0 maybe. Right, Cam?" he said, looking at his wife for approval. "Maybe," she responded, with a quick shake of her head and a heavy blink, as if to say, "Who are you to speak to me?" She shifted, slightly annoyed at the interruption, then continued her small talk with Mom. "So, it's not his neck then?" Mr. Wilson asked me. "I guess that's good news, all things considered." He gave me a friendly punch on the arm and forced a smile. "Hey, Finnegan, did you happen to see the accident a few weeks back? Maybe more, just outside of Salt Creek?" "What Oh, there he is." Mom lifted her index finger to Mrs. Wilson to show she'd be right back. "Mrs. Barrett," the doctor said. Mom spoke in a hush. She walked in close to the doctor. I couldn't understand what she was saying, and her back was to us. Then, not whispering, the doctor said, No, he'll be fine." He lifted his clipboard. His blue scrubs were faded, and his shoes were white canvas and dirty. "We're going to keep him here overnight, but I think he should be able to go home tomorrow. They'll be bringing him up here, to his room in a few minutes, okay? But he'll still be very groggy from being under, so let him rest." "Of course," Mom replied, loud enough to hear. "I know that you and your boy are worried about him and maybe want to talk to him, but a quiet, dark room will do him good. And of course, you being there with him will help. The nurses will—" "God must not be done with your dad yet, Finnegan," Mr. Wilson said, interrupting my eavesdropping. "Done with him?" I asked Mr. Wilson. Troy rolled his eyes and looked away. Mr. Wilson then stammered, I mean, there must be something God needs him for, or maybe your dad has a purpose that isn't complete. Who knows? I mean, God could have just as easily taken his hand of protection away from him today. But he didn't. you know?
I suppose, I conceded.
But Dad isn't religious. We don't even go to church. Well, we did when I was a kid, at Easter. But even then, Dad stayed home to hide the Easter eggs. So,
Mr. Wilson replied with just the shrug of his shoulders, like he'd lost interest already in the point he'd brought up. I saw a figure walking into my peripheral vision and then past me. It was the silver-haired woman. I watched her walk away. The others paid no mind whatsoever. She turned her head to the side that I could see her face partly. She nodded, but didn't look back into my eyes. Then the voice of the doctor was clear again. "So I'll see you before I leave tonight, okay? Then first thing in the morning, okay? The nurses overnight are an incredible team." He paused for a response. We all expressed approval. "He did great. We'll have him healed in no time, okay?" Okay, Mom said. "I'll have a prescription for you tomorrow, too."
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
"Take care of your dad," he shouted to me. "I will,"